Sorry, sorry, yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Olga Martin Ortega. I am Professor of International Law at the University of Greenwich in the UK, and I have the immense pleasure to chair this session. This session is titled European Sustainable Procurement, and with it, we have some very interesting papers that we're going to hear from. As Leila has said already, unfortunately, Dr. Albert Sanchez Graels is not able to come, but he has kindly sent us a recorded presentation. Sorry, not able to appear on the video. None of us were able to come anywhere. Without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Roberto Caranta, which is going to be presenting on public procurement for SDGs. I'll ask the speakers to please speak 15-20 minutes, no more, so we can have enough time for presentations. For Q&A. I will kindly show up my video again and maybe show up a sign for the speaker, so I don't have to interrupt them. But I'll take my video off for now, and I let and Roberto start. Thank you, Roberto.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, thank God. I'm not very good at this kind of technology stuff, but first of all, I really want to thank Leila for organizing what is already a very interesting session. The previous speaker had just brought us a lot of actual experience on how things are done and should be done. I will take a little bit more academic tone and talk about public procurement for the sustainable development goals. And the reason why this is relevant is that first of all, public procurement is normally featuring a role in the recent relevant documents. For instance, it is specifically recalled in Target 7 of SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, but also in the Europe 2020 strategies and in similar documents, including the European Green Deal. Why this is so? Well, okay, this is about sustainability, it's about ethics standards, but I'm afraid that also money is important. Public procurement is economically very, very relevant. You can do stuff with public procurement. It's pity Albert cannot be present in person. We usually spar over it is advisable, let's say so, to use procurement money for these other objectives, let's say so, is very much about, let's say, strictly economic value for money. I'm more for, listen, this is a lot of money. We have been talking about the fiscal crisis of the state for the past 30 years, honestly, and inside this present moment, the things are going to get worse in, I think, a couple of years. So we really need to be very efficient in the way we spend the procurement money, and this includes achieving more goals. And procurement is really relevant for almost all the sustainable development goals. It is specifically referred to in SDG 17, but it is relevant for most of these. And next slide is some examples. Just think about gender equality, decent work. I'm sure Olga will be dealing with this. This is very relevant in public procurement, and especially considering that for all of our goods, or most of our goods, but also for quite a lot of our services these days, we have to do with very long supply chains spanning the whole world. And of course, let's say the race to have rock bottom prices is having an impact, a social impact, not acceptable, and the public procurement must take stock of these. Other two instances, SDG 9, the first is about developing and sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And this, of course, is about public procurement, or if it is not public procurement, is something very akin to public procurement like concessions or PPPs. This is how you build your infrastructures. And so you need to keep sustainability in your focus when you make your choices. And of course, you must also create your contractual and strategic approach to this infrastructure, keeping in mind affordability and equitable access. So we move from what might be a bit more green aspects to social aspects. And of course, integrating climate change. This is SDG 13 into policies, strategies, and planning. I will go on praising the previous speaker presentation. That was really just great. What you are doing in Catalonia really deserves not just to be applauded, but to be spread over as best practice to other countries and regional governments, because it is really important to have what policies in place and strategies and documents. And this leads me to my next slide. So far, it is really about public procurement being important for achieving the SDGs. The second part of my presentation is, okay, but how? And to give some indication on this, I refer to a recent document, February 2020. It looks ages ago, because we were, let's say, before COVID, we were actually traveling and meeting and having coffee. And within the SMART project, you will know, you will meet Beate Schoffel tomorrow. Beate Schoffel, she was the lead researcher behind this important project. And within this project, we worked on a document, Sustainability Through Procurement. Marta Andov and myself did, let's say, the editing, but we had a lot of inputs from outstanding colleagues. And just to refer to those who are present, Leila helped us very much with corporate social responsibility and technology, and Olga with social aspects, what universities and other actors are doing specifically on the fight against slavery, but Olga will talk about this in the next session. Raquel Carvalho, who is attending conference, she also helped in this. Yes, Dirk. Okay. It is available. Thank you, Leila. It is available on SSRN. And these proposals we worked on are divided on three aspects: organizational behavioral changes, part is under the picture, sorry, planning and managing contracts sustainably, and then I'm here by training proposals for law reform. I must say that at this stage, as the previous speakers made clear, we have already a decent legal framework, so now we really need to work on this legal framework. So basically, our proposals, organizational and behavioral changes. There is a lot of things that have been discussed in the previous presentation. It is really necessary to develop policies and strategies. I think one important takeaway from the previous speech is that okay, you can grow one flower at a time, but this is very effort intensive and doesn't pay as much as really putting in place policies and strategies, documents, guidelines. Another important aspect we insisted on, there are actually, I must avow, but we have time constraints, and Olga, she's a very muscular chairwoman. There are more than the one I'm showing. I'm just focusing on a few of them. It is important that the exercise is also conducting bottom-up public procurers, those who are really already experimenting things, let's say the avant-garde, speaking in SPP terms, of public procurers must be involved in developing these guidance documents, these policies and strategies, because they have the experience on the ground. Thank you, Olga. I can see you now. And training, including stakeholders. Planning and managing. First, there need to be a map of the risk. This is really very important. It must be very done collaboratively with bidders to mitigate risk, but also reporting. Again, the previous speaker was 100% right in stressing is not enough to put that in your advertisement. You really need to monitor what is done and then report on what you find. And the duty to protect human rights and the other aspects should really be referred to all the public supply chains. As I already told, these are very long supply chains. Next one, a fast proposal for reform. What is a little bit missing is a CSR. The Commission stopped these. The Commission was honestly losing all the battle on sustainable public procurement, so they just kept their last small fort, say, oh, you can't ask social responsibility from companies. I think this should be changed. We think this should be changed. Also, there should be a mandatory ground for exclusion for breaches of sustainable social rules, and work should be restarted to introduce mandatory sustainability requirements. My next two slide, last slide, kind of let's say self-promotion. We are going to start in March a EU project. Olga, again, with other colleagues, she's involved exactly on SPP. It will be 15 PhDs working on SPP for 3 years. This will be, I think, an important tool, and the contribution from everyone will be very much appreciated. Also, but this bites a little bit in the Friday session. I will not be able to do that, but if you are interested, you can look on what we are doing on this in Turin with a specific master program. Finally, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we have some time for questions. But thank you very much. This is really a great event. Thank Leila for putting this together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Roberto. That was masterful skill at keeping in time. So yeah, as Roberto just mentioned, it seemed like ages ago that we were in Oslo, able to have coffee breaks with people and like group photo. How nice was that? So what I'll do is I'll open up the floor for some questions now, and then a couple of questions now, specifically to Roberto's paper, and then at the end we can have as well like a more global discussion as well. So if there's a couple of pressing questions for Roberto, if you can raise your hand, I can see in the chat who's got their hand raised, and maybe I can say your name and you can unmute yourself and be able to speak. If you have any questions at this point, otherwise we will be happy to come into the next. Yeah, I can see Hari Kumar. Can you please unmute yourself and do your question to? Hari, do we have you? No, I can't. I mean, we've got the. Oh, sorry. Questions only through the chat. Sorry about that. Hari, can you just ask your question in the chat so I can read it out? Sorry about that. Okay. As I can't see any question coming in the chat, how about we move on to the next presentation, and then please all the questions that you have, put them in the chat and indicate who's the question specifically to, and we'll read them out when in the Q&A session at the end. Great. So could I have please Dr. Ama Ayo, delivering sustainability through community benefits in Welsh public contracts. Thank you very much, Ama. I will put my sign of 5 minutes and then 1 minute. And if you just can let me know that's okay, you've seen it, because otherwise I might just stand like an idiot with my with my sign. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Great. So thank you, Olga, for that introduction. Thank you, Roberto, and the earlier speaker. It was nice to listen to you both and to see how it all fits into what I'm going to be speaking about. To some extent, a number of the issues that I'm going to be talking about have tangentially been addressed by your previous discussions. I will be using Wales as an exemplar case in order to discuss delivering sustainability through public contracts. Here I will be focusing on Welsh initiatives around sustainable procurement. Just as an overview to my presentation, I'll give you a little bit of a background on Wales, our little beautiful country, which is somewhere I've come to call home because the scenery is lovely. Unfortunately, we've got other tensions which we need to address through public procurement. And that's where I move on to looking at sustainable public procurement in Wales, and then a bit of a little research that I've been undertaking in this area, which is still ongoing, but which I'm really interested in hearing about perspectives from other jurisdictions around this angle of things. So a little bit about Wales. Our public procurement spend, it's not that much, but it is still big in the sense that the public sector is really the biggest sector in Wales. We don't really have we don't have large size companies in like rural Wales where I live. For example, it's only the university and the local councils that provide jobs for people. So you can see, because of this huge size of the public procurement market, we are interested in using public procurement to address a number of sustainable goals. Importantly, Wales comprises of about 44 public bodies. Out of those 44 public bodies, there are 22 local authorities, which account for more than 3.3 billion pounds of the procurement spend of the overall 6 billion pounds per annum procurement spend. It's something that if it's used really well, it could bring results in terms of improved impacts on lives and communities, as well as the environment and future generation. So to this end, what Wales has been doing is looking at the framework in terms of public procurement and in introducing its own framework to help and bring sustainable procurement to the forefront, as well as introducing a number of government policies where they try to use public procurement to influence sustainable goals. As you know, Wales is one of the 4 nations in the United Kingdom. Public procurement is a devolved matter in the sense that we have the ability to legislate from our perspective, but we've taken the perspective in Wales to go with England rather than Scotland, for example, has its own public contract regulations, but we at the moment, I have to put that qualification because of Brexit, our public contract regulations obviously is a copy out from the EU directive from 2014, but we've tried to localize certain aspects of it to the extent of trying to influence the imperatives in the directives to generate local benefits. One of the legislation that Wales has done, and which to many jurisdictions is very novel, it's the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015. It's basically a commitment by Wales in terms of legislative measures to adhere to the Sustainable Development Goals, which Roberto nicely mentioned and covered in his presentation. And as part of this presentation, I will be talking more specifically about how we have moved from community benefits to trying to go beyond using procurement to achieve those wider goals as we understand them in terms of the 7 themes or goals that Wales want to deliver to ensure a better community, society, and economy for the current as well as future generations. In addition to this, over the years, Wales has traditionally introduced a number of policies on public procurement, and of importance to my talk today is the Welsh Government public procurement policy, which was introduced in 2015. So looking at that policy, community benefits, it's something that features really heavily in that policy. I am hastened to say that it wasn't in 2015 that the policy was introduced. It had been piloted as far back as 2003, and it has been reintroduced in many reiterations over the years. Importantly, when we look at the idea of community benefits, this is where the Welsh government wants its public sector bodies to make sure that public bodies in Wales actually consider how procurement can deliver added value in terms of impacts for the economy, impacts for the environment, as well as impact for the community in terms of social impacts through the procurement activities that its public sector bodies engage in. And the rationale behind this is because the Welsh government sees public procurement as a key driver for delivering our sustainable development goals, which is something that, as I mentioned, Roberto highlighted. And we've developed this along many lines in terms of the One Wales, One Planet Sustainable Development Scheme, as well as tackling poverty action plan programs that Wales has been initiating. One thing about Wales is that because it's heavily reliant on the public sector, there is huge poverty in many areas of Wales. While you might have the capital like Cardiff flourishing really well, the rural areas are really in need of innovative solutions to bring money and to enhance the lives of people around here. So, in terms of the community benefits that we look at in Wales, a number of policies have highlighted what contracts should be containing. Importantly, contracts should be aiming at retention and training for existing workforce, so that people that feature as part of the contract or that are introduced into part of the contract would, at the end of the day, gain useful skills. And this fits in nicely to the next community benefit outcome, which is related to training and recruitment opportunities for the economically inactive. In Wales, we have a number of school leavers who, at the end of their high school experience, might not be going on to universities or to further education. So one of the things, or one of the themes around community benefits, is to look at how within public contracts we can make sure, or the contracting authority as well as the supplier can make sure, that economically inactive persons such as job leavers can get apprenticeship, can also get learning opportunities, or even can get recruitment opportunities in order to upskill themselves and then reduce the economic impact of them just claiming benefits from the government. Importantly, SME issues is something that's very topical in Wales, because a number of our businesses here are quite small businesses. And when we tender for public contracts, traditionally we see big national companies coming in to compete more favorably than our local companies. So in terms of supporting our local businesses, as part of community benefits, there are efforts to ensure that an integration of local businesses into large contracts, so that they form part of the second tier of performance for contracts. And this also is environmental benefits is something that we try to promote. We call Wales, many areas in Wales, areas of outstanding natural beauty. We want to keep it kind of free from the impacts of environmental degradation as much as possible. So we want to ensure that the production processes for things that are used here, as well as things that are done here minimally impact our environment negatively. I will just move on to a number of other things because I'm conscious my time is going, but you get the idea of what we try to use procurement to establish or to achieve. So with this in mind, Wales has always kind of tried to look beyond this, and the approach has been that the Welsh government sets the policy for doing things, then Welsh public sector bodies are supposed to implement them by applying the policies as appropriate to different contracts. The two approaches that can be done, they could implement community benefits as a core requirement in the contract, which means that it's included in the subject matter of the contract and is also evaluated and scored. In addition, it could be done as a non-core approach where it's used as a contract condition in terms of not evaluating or scoring it, but looking at it in terms of added benefits and those associated elements of a tender. Importantly, in Wales, we're trying to understand the local multiplier effects of our contracts. So because of this, there has always been a measure of a system of measurement, which I will talk further about it not being really accurate in capturing the effects. And added to this is the responsibility of the supplier. The communications always open in order to try to understand what our supplier community can present to us. Moving from the community benefits, which I mentioned started or was piloted in 2003, over the years, there have been many reiterations of that policy. Then in 2015, we came out with the Wellbeing of Future Generations of Wales Act, which goes beyond requiring community benefits, but ensuring that public sector bodies almost have a legal duty, or not almost have, they impose a legal duty on public bodies to consider 7 well-being goals for Wales, which I have enumerated on the slides, and you're welcome to read some of these materials. I've provided links at the end of my slides for that. So what has happened over the years, as we've seen, is that similar to the pattern of the community benefits, the policy or the direction is mandated by the Welsh government, while the public sector body would deliver it in line with future generation champions. Added to this is the fact that we want now to begin to measure the impact of the Wellbeing Act. At the moment, there is no definite measurement tool, but what we've done in Wales is we're looking back to England because they have produced a social value measurement framework to use it and adapt it accordingly to our Welsh situation to see what the multiplier effect or the effect of this Sustainability Wellbeing Act is going to have on our community. And this is what this leads me nicely to the discussions around the research I've been doing. So a lot of desk-based research has gone on in terms of what the Welsh government is undertaking, and I've also done some empirical research with councils, with the Welsh Local Government Association, and with other relevant parties doing research in this area to try and understand what is going on here, because it seems once again is a reiteration of things that have been in existence for a long time. The preliminary evidence coming out from my research is, which is not surprising anyway, is that to some extent all 22 councils have referred to community benefit policy in their various contracts, but mainly in terms of large public sector contracts. And a number of councils are now looking at going beyond community benefits in line with the Wellbeing for Future Generation Acts for Wales. What is important is that when you look at the Wellbeing for Future Generations Act for Wales report, which was published in May this year, it really points out a lot of things that could be learned or shared by the council amongst themselves, in terms of there are disparate practices going on, but there are no case studies of prominence that of prominence being shared by the different councils, which I think is an act that councils are missing out. I spoke to Swansea, and they're doing a number of fantastic work in this area, and I've kind of encouraged them that they need to share the outcomes of their work. One of the reasons why these councils are not sharing the outcome of their work is the fact that they engage in a number of challenges. A significant challenge has to do with competing priorities and conflicting agenda. A number of the people that I spoke with said frequently, while they're trying to concentrate on a particular policy, another priority is coming out, and that then confuses them. Most importantly, for this year, COVID-19 has disrupted a number of their planning. Also, in terms of the political environment, Brexit, I can see you, Olga. Thank you. I'm almost done. Thank you. Brexit has also put a number of issues in the clog of progress for most councils, because they are anticipating what's the change going to be like, what's the legal framework going forward going to be like. And while they're trying to unearth their practices and see what is going on, it does have repercussions in terms of morale and surrounding issues. Three other significant issues emerging from the research has to do with resources, and this is something that Roberta talked on. A number of councils mentioned the fact that they actually don't have sufficient staff to work on these high-level issues of considering well-being goals or considering sustainable public procurement issues in their contracts. And more important, they're not even knowledgeable regarding how to draw up appropriate requirements, how to score benefits, how to monitor and enforce implementation. So there is certainly something lacking in this area around knowledge awareness and how this can impact the sustainable development goals. Something also that is important is that measurements at the moment, many of the councils I spoke to confess that even with the measuring tools for the community benefits, it wasn't always accurate, and they do need more software and training around how best to monitor the community benefits impacts in this area. And another issue has to do with suppliers, that they do need to understand how best to challenge suppliers to innovate and to introduce some of these requirements. A further lesson that I picked up was the fact that understanding of the priorities and buy-in from the public sector is really essential, because while a government might introduce a particular policy, if that particular council is not engaged in it, then there might be difficulty. And it's actually very important now for the public sector to address the resource issues I've mentioned, as well as to coordinate and share good practices around sustainable public procurement. Also, by the time they come out with a measurement tool, we need appropriate training around those well-being goals in order to address these issues. And also, in addition, we need to make sure that suppliers are catered for in the arrangement, because while discussions are going on with the public sector, it's important not to leave suppliers behind in the conversation. And the last slide just has a number of the references I've used in this talk. So yes, that nicely brings the conversation to an end. I hope I haven't overgone my 15 minutes too much, but it's important to remember that this is an ongoing conversation that the public sector is having, and hopefully with input from academics like us, we can influence practices that would emerge in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was really right on time, but also really interesting and important, and it will actually connect very well. Well, connects very well with Roberta's presentation and to later on with mine in terms of this double sphere of the social and environmental, which is very locally focused, or at the same time also needs to be a wider understanding of the impact that public purchasing practices have on the supply chain or global environment, not just within the local communities. So this has been fantastic. We'll do the questions afterwards. I have to say that I think coming to visit you in Bangor was one of the first things that I had to cancel, like physically moving, and because I was examining your student with an excellent thesis, Miriam Empa, on these issues. So I really hope we can meet in Bangor as soon as possible.
We'll be delighted to have you.
Without further ado, I'm going to try my technology here to share Albert's presentation. So I'm going to select my screen so you can see Albert's presentation. Let me just can you hear the sound? Let me just check on the chat if someone sound is very bad. Okay, not very sure what to no, you can't hear the sound. Okay, well maybe sorry about that. We're going to try the platform with the sound. Another technology, I'm going to get some speakers and put them higher. Let's see if it works. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay.
Today, I would like to spend some minutes talking about digital technologies, public procurement sustainability, and to offer some expert.
Is this any better? Perfecto. Yeah, we can hear. That's great. Okay, I'll start it from the beginning right now, and let's enjoy the session.
Hello, I am Alberto Sanchez Reis, and I'm a professor of economic law at the University of Bristol Law School. Today, I would like to spend some minutes talking about digital technologies, public procurement sustainability, and to offer some exploratory thoughts. But before that, let me start by saying a very heartfelt thank you to Leila Melman and the other organizers of the conference, and also to present my apologies that I cannot be in the panel live with all of you. Unfortunately, I've not been feeling very well the last days, so all you get today is a recorded version of the presentation. But that doesn't mean I'm shying away from the questions. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, please feel free to email me. I will give you the details at the end of the presentation. So I was saying, the idea for the next few minutes is to try to reflect on the way in which digitalization can foster a more sustainable public procurement, in particular in the European Union context. So this is going to be a bit Europe-centric for those of you listening from outside of the European Union. And also to stress, of course, the pretty obvious point that without building and enabling that architecture, not much of what is planned or what could be imagined in terms of digitalizing public procurement can happen. And finally, I would like to point at some areas for further research, because of course, it's just a nascent area of intersection between some horizontal policies, and we'll come back to that. And therefore, there are more open research questions than answers. And maybe if we have a common roadmap, then we can push the research together. By way of background, of course, this discussion takes place against the never-ending debate on what is public procurement for. Is public procurement on to buy things? Should public procurement be used for something else, such as sustainability? Should public procurement be used to push for innovation, including the adoption of digital technologies? And these are issues that we could discuss endlessly. And in fact, I have had a few, or actually I have a few debates with some of the members of the panel, including Professor Caranta and Leila herself. But let's not get on the details of whether there's regulatory transfer substitution, or whether the
can see that the voice was bad now. I don't know. I'm not sure what to do. So Leila, if you have any better idea.
Apologies, Olga, for interjecting. I think it was all right until you put something in front of it.
Okay.
Yes, it was all right until you put the speakers. Yes, that's what I was trying to say. It was perfect until the speakers.
Problem is that when I start the presentation, then I can't see the chat anymore. So I can only see the presentation. So okay, so
how this can be
try again.
Rather than getting on the detail of
Better?
the reasons why it cannot be achieved through procurement. It could be done through legislation, which, by the way, is the direction that, in my view, the European Union is starting to move. Now, when we talk about procurement sustainability, clearly this is an area of increased policy-making attention. And the sad truth is that development is just very, very slow. And if you look at it, in the 2004 directives, there was already a certain push for green procurement. The label was changed to sustainability-related procurement for the revision of 2014 public procurement rules. And in the end, the rules in the new directive create a lot of space for sustainability considerations. And my submission to you is that most of the problems come with the implementation of the rules, with a very narrow interpretation of what is actually possible, but also with a very lacking understanding of how we can make some sustainability concerns play out in a context regulated by mainly transparency, the equal treatment and competition. Now, of course, the difficulty we have is that sustainable procurement is complex and that there is an institutional inertia against it. So it will not be a surprise to see that what the European Union has been doing is try to push against inertia. And this is very clear, for example, in the 2017 strategy for public procurement, in the Making Procurement Work in and for Europe document, where the Commission is very clear that the Union has to facilitate of strategic procurement, including sustainable public procurement. But it presented mostly some proposals that were geared towards the offering of guidance, which mainly has not been forthcoming because there's not been much beyond the binding revision of the guidance in 2016. Some proposals for standardized solutions and for the sharing of best practices. This is quite a shy intervention by the European Union, even if it's labeled as very strategic and there's a push for member states to do more. In reality, the Union is not really giving many more tools. But not really received. Now, in the European Green Deal from last year, there was new emphasis on trying to leverage public procurement and the massive volume of expenditure that is channeled through procurement to achieve environmental sustainability goals. And here, the interesting bit is that in different aspects of the document, there is, again, a push for more guidance or more new recommendations, best practices. But interestingly, there is some mention to the inclusion of minimum mandatory green criteria in legislation. And I think, honestly, that if the European Union wants to move forward, the way is by passing mandatory legislation. We will have to do regulations, particularly concerning product regulation, so the technical specifications can start to be tightened up in a very big number of procurement processes, because otherwise we will always live in this area where most of the implementation depends on member states' discretion. And of course, different member states have different priorities, but also very different stuff. And for example, taking the Regional Innovator Index as a proxy of where the member states may be, then one realizes that there is a very big disparity between the different member states in terms of the intensity of ecological innovation, but also that the picture has not really changed between the two waves of the scorecard that we have available, 2010, 2016. So this means that, of course, there are very big fractures in different parts of the European Union, and the European Union itself, the Commission, has great difficulty to design and push for policy, which in the end is going to depend on the member states' discretion. And that's why we want to get serious in the fight against climate change. And if we want to use procurement to deliver sustainability, not necessarily beyond what the rest of the market does, but just to achieve an acceptable level of sustainability in procurement, we will have to see many more binding rules. Background, I think digital technologies explode, and this is a phenomenon of probably the last couple or 3 years, but it's impossible to go one day without hearing somebody talk about big data or machine learning or artificial intelligence, blockchain, the Internet of Things, or whatever we can imagine. And I would just provocatively put to you that this is just the new El Dorado. This is where loads of money is going in terms of investment, loads of money is going in terms of research, and lots of attention in research. But the hard fact is that these technologies are really mature. And these are technologies that may be very promising, but are just so far pie in the sky. And they're actually diverting a very significant amount of volume of funding, particularly for research, which I think is quite disproportionate. I think that particularly in terms of preventing stupid implementations of the directives or technologies or any implementations that may not work in the end, what we need to do is take a much more critical look at the potential of the different technologies. So, of course, we don't know exactly what the technology can do, but if we know what inputs it requires and we know what outputs it can create, then we can start thinking about whether they are right or not for the public sector. And that's the approach that I would like to take to the technological part of this presentation. Now, of course, if we start a bit more modestly, we talk about procurement digitalization. This is one priority of the European Commission that is also not new. Now we talk about procurement digitalization, where we used to talk about e-procurement, but basically this is a long process, and the transition to digital communications in procurement is basically now seen as an enabler of a broader strategy to create an AI-friendly regulatory environment that can also be a catalyst for broader innovation and broader applications in the public sector. Somehow procurement is seen as the spearhead of a process of renewal of the public administration. And it's also interesting to see that there are new discussions and new waves of policymaking that very much resound like the entrepreneurial state that Max Lucado described, for example, in the context of the development of the internet. Now, how far have we got? Really not that far. So from the revision of the procurement directives, which in the initial proposal of the Commission would have created a very, very fast transition to a fully electronic procurement, the reality of things is that it's going to take us about 10 years, basically until late 2023, until we have real electronic generation and electronic automated storing of data mandated as an underlying architecture to the public procurement functioning. What we have so far are different bits of the procurement process that have been mandatorily put in electronic form, and of course the use of electronic communication. But the big revolution, if there is one to be had, is going to be in the creation automatically and hopefully without scope for human error of data representing what procurement is actually taking place. So we can start having both a sense of the real magnitude of procurement beyond the very patchy publications on the tenders electronic daily, but also so that we can have this information basically in real time. So we don't have to wait for statistical reporting, but we can just see it as the data emerges. And in the end, what the Commission formulated in its 2017 strategy is what we could just see as a relatively bold, but also a bit abstract vision of what's the future of procurement X.0, not necessarily 4.0, where they express the view that the new technologies can just help us rethink fundamentally the way that procurement, but also the public administration is organized, and that there's a chance to reshape them, relying on digital transformation. Now, here, the provocation is that we should not just carry on doing electronic procurement just by translating into digital terms the process-based processes of the 18th century that underlie the current regulation, but just rethink and reimagine how it works on the basis of technologies. And probably for that, what we need to do is first try to understand a little bit the different technologies, but also of all of the panoply of technologies that we could think about applying in procurement, try to see which are the ones that are more promising. So let's focus on that. Now, which technologies could be used in procurement? Well, there's a very large menu of technologies that are now more or less emerging or reaching a certain amount of condensation in the public management or public administration sphere. And this report from the OECD of 2019, which you can access through the link, basically gives a very long list, which I have pulled out the ones I think may be more likely to be applicable to procurement. Of course, the creation of digital platforms is quite interesting for procurement. And in that regard, everything that has to do with distributed ledger technologies or shorthand blockchain is one that has been attracting loads of interest, in particular because it could enable the building of smart contracts on top of the blockchain, but also the development of the Internet of Things in a way that allows for a certain bridging of the virtual and physical realities. There's also some interest or some promise in the application of artificial intelligence solutions based on natural language processing and the development of virtual assistants, which could be used to guide the public procurer through either legal requirements or sustainability requirements or policy requirements. Because once we are able to feed complex documents of policy to the algorithm, then they could operate as a filter so that every decision the procurer wants to make is run through the filter, and then maybe we could have either recommendations on how to do it, or maybe red flags on potential problems, or any other sorts of indications of further information that has to be found or formulated before decisions are made or can be deployed. And still within the artificial intelligence frame, we could also be interested in deeper learning. So we could try to create mechanisms whereby the algorithms can independently seek to, for example, maximize sustainability goals on the basis of what procurement activity is taking place. We could try to rely strongly on recommender systems or expert systems, whether it's within a chatbot or not. So as you see, mainly, I think that the technologies that can have an application are those that help us have digital platforms that are advanced and that can sustain the development of added value services, but also everything that has to do with the processing of big data and trying to extract policy implementation insights from that data. That would be the abstract idea. Now, where are we in reality? Well, this map is from last year, so maybe there are a few more strategies, but what we see is that by and large, almost every OECD country has an AI strategy, and I bet you that if you read them, they're all not that different. They all want to be world-leading jurisdictions in the development of artificial intelligence that is ethically oriented, that serves a social purpose, and that maximizes the public budgets in this context of economic recession, and particularly now after the virus and all the economic downturn that is already the reality and will stay with us for a few years. But if you see there, what we're talking only is about strategies. So this is just about formulating a broad umbrella either of AI across the economy or AI for the public sector. And the only dedicated AI strategy for the public transformation at the time was to be found in Finland. But this is all very abstract, high-level formulations. What is important for me is to try to look at what's happening on the ground and to see whether there is much movement yet. Are we using digital technologies to achieve sustainability or really to transform procurement? And again, this may be a tad outdated. It's from last year, but look at it. Seeing how much noise, how much talk there is about artificial intelligence and blockchain in procurement, it was quite surprising to see that the OECD could only map 3 potential uses of blockchain, mainly to publish information or to guarantee the traceability of information or to implement a specific smart contract. But they could find no more general use of digital technologies at all. So basically, the possibility of using digital technologies to achieve sustainability goals or any other goals in public procurement of today is still a goal for the future, but it's really far from a reality. Why is this worth talking about then? Well, it's worth talking about because, of course, using digital technologies to achieve sustainability would bring together two strategic goals or ideals. And if we could harness the potential of the digital technologies to promote more sustainable public procurement, then we could maybe leapfrog and break out the cycle of inertia that keeps making procurement not necessarily as green as we would need it. And of course, the difficulty here is that any conversation we have in this area is just an exercise in speculation. So everything I'm going to say for the rest of the presentation is just trying to look into the future, and it's a future that is changing and a future that is very uncertain. Giving a similar presentation last year, the boundary of what was technologically feasible within the public administration seemed pretty limited. But after lockdown and after COVID, and even the fact that we're having this conference only virtually, what seems clear is that when there is a very clear need, then it's easy to break the inertia. So it could be that at some point, if information on climate change really ends up dawning on all the relevant policymakers, we will be able to push against these inertias. And by then, we should have a good idea of what we're trying to do. So that's why I think speculation has value in itself, not because I think it's necessarily something we can implement very soon, but because I think that when called to implement it, we should really have a good idea of what we want to do. Now, maybe this is simplifying things, but the way I understand the main digital technologies that I have stressed as potential applications in procurement is as follows. I think that artificial intelligence is basically a tool for the massive processing of data, big data, if you will. And of course, it can enable the implementation of database machine learning solutions, which means we can have automated classification or forecast of different types of problems. And also we can automate some tasks through the robotic process automation. Secondly, blockchain is fundamentally just a very distributed data management solution, which main advantage is that it's tamper evident. So if anybody fiddles with the information that has been recorded in the database, that's clear for everybody to see. Some useful applications only where it's impossible to achieve that level of tamper resistance or tamper evidence through other means. And finally, the Internet of Things fundamentally are a set of physical devices that transform information about the real environment in data, and that data can then be fed into either a blockchain or an artificial intelligence program. Basically, this could be oracles, and it could enable oracle robotics that could help us reach the digital virtual frontier in some aspects of procurement and maybe stock management. How far are we from these technologies being implementable? Well, Gartner is a big consultancy in the technology field, has this graph on the different levels of, first of hype or inflated expectations about different technologies, and then the more likely development of technologies that can be implemented. And they forecast, or they try to see how long it will take for the technologies to be useful. And here, if you can spend some time looking through the graph, you will see that blockchain, which is now in the throes of disillusionment, or some aspects of smart contracts, which are really at the peak of inflated expectations right now, or some AI governance, which is going to be relevant in this context, are all marked in the clear blue, which means that we expect them to be available within 2 to 5 years. And that
Hello? Okay, sorry, I'm back. I'll put it back. Is that okay? Would you like for me to put it back? It should be nearly ready. Okay. Sorry about that.
And other implementations, such as more advanced uses of blockchain or other aspects of data analytics or digital business transformation, which is very important for transformation of the public administration, will take 5 to 10 years. Well, whatever it's 2 to 5 or 5 to 10 years, what looks likely is that we still have some time to try to figure out the applications that we're going to give to these technologies before they are mature. But there's one thing also in common, and that of course will really condition the possibility of actually deploying these digital technologies, which is whether we have the required information. And as I was saying at the beginning, the sad or cold fact that without data, there is nothing that digital technologies can do. Maybe they will be at some point able to generate their own data from raw natural language, and that's an area where there have been some developments. But in terms of procurement, no data, no fund. And this is what the European Commission has recognized already. And that's why they have been pushing for more contract registers, for more and more use of electronic means of publication in structured ways to try to get the data to emerge rather than having the really patchy statistical reporting that we have had so far. And there are very important initiatives at the European level. There's quite a few interesting rules that will enter into force between 2021 and 2023, including the largely OECD, so Open Contracting Data Standard Compliant Electronic Forms or e-forms. This is going to be a significant transformation of the way information is collected, published, and exchanged at the European level. There will also be some foreign government APIs that will be developed at the back of them. There's the Open Data Directive, also bound to be transposed, the Business to Government Data Sharing Initiative, and the current guidelines of the European Commission. All of these basically will try to create mechanisms whereby new data is automatically generated and automatically stored in ways that can be exchanged and accessed easily. Now, the blind spot of this project, and I think this is something that for procurement is going to be very important, that we need to do more to generate backwards looking information. We need information about what has been procured already, what the public sector already owns, because for durable goods in particular, for equipment and investment in buildings, it's very important to know what we already own to see if we can improve it. For example, from a sustainability perspective, can we improve the energy consumption of buildings? Can we refurbish or reuse or recycle products? Can we reduce their impact now, even if they have already been bought? And this is something that so far is a blind spot, as I was saying, and where I think more policy energy has to be put. Now, assuming that all of these initiatives and many others result in the proper data that we need, what can then we think about doing with artificial intelligence and sustainable procurement? Well, I think that once the data is available, we can do quite a few things. One of the things we could do is just have a sustainability-oriented big data analysis. So if we can determine very clear sustainability-specific targets, such as reduction in energy consumption, such as reduction in energy loss or water loss, then we can start processing loads of data that can be useful, for example, from meters, and then try to identify where the problems are. So, for example, we can scope where procurement has to be deployed in terms of what investments are necessary in the grid for electricity or in the pipes for water, so that can be reduced. This is something that should drive where procurement should be developed, but that doesn't mean that procurement has to be different than the traditional procurement. One of the things we could do is develop sustainability indexes or screens so that we start actually ranking the procurement of different entities according to these indexes and screens so that it can act as a measure for the self-improvement of these entities, or maybe to mandate compliance with specific indexes or screens through legislation, similarly to, for example, how building energy is developed. We could also use machine learning supported data analysis with sustainability goals. Basically here what I mean is anything that we can classify or forecast as having an impact that is neutral or less on the environment could be then revisited. So loads of procurement decisions could be put through the filter to see what's going to be their future impact on the environment. And if they don't pass the threshold, then they should be pulled back as not being implemented. And similarly, we could have sustainability-oriented procurement planning. So we could use machine learning to tell us, for example, where populations are going to change, which new areas are going to be more populated in the future or less populated in the future, so we can start planning procurement according to evolving needs, depending on what sort of models we can develop.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to pass Albert's thoughts on.
And the final thing is that, of course,
after Albert's thoughts on blockchain, because we're running out of time, but let's go to his conclusions now.
So some final thoughts on where this leaves us. Well, I fundamentally think that the policymakers should keep focused on the short term in the creation of the enabling data architecture. And of course, for us researchers, the regulation of this data architecture and the problems it poses should keep us focused in the short term. In the medium term, as I said, I think that there are research opportunities for the design of the digital technology-enabled solutions that we want to deploy, particularly for sustainability. And we will, of course, be interested in the regulation, their governance, and their social impact. And I think there's way too much uncertainty in the long term. So I wouldn't really be doing long-term research in this area. But of course, maybe there's better informed, more imaginative people in the audience that can see blue skies where I only see a few clouds. A version of this paper is now a little bit dated, but it's available on SRN, and I plan to rework on it as soon as I can. So if anybody has any feedback, I would really be grateful for it. I have developed a few lateral ideas that you can find in these other papers that, of course, you can access through the slides. And all that is left for me is to thank you for your attention. Hope that you will be in touch. In particular, if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, or any information that you would like to share with me, if you get in touch, I promise to reply. I'm really sorry I cannot be there live today. Thanks again to the organizers, and I hope that the discussion is very fruitful. Thank you.
Great. So let me just share my camera again. Great. Apologies for the technical issues. I think we're probably not as far. Roberto is not as far as he likes to argues with us with regards to the use of public procurement as a social policy tool, I think. But that'd be good when we can actually argue it in person soon, very soon, I hope. So I'm sorry I had to cut that the very end part, but I think it's fair that we give the floor to our next final speakers and give them enough time as well to present. So Dr. Christopher Jukins and Dr. Patricia Dineen, if I said that correctly, will be presenting now on teaching sustainability in public procurement online, methods, means, and a global audience. So same as the other speakers, I'll just put my paper up when you have 5 minutes left, and when please
It seems to me that the presenters are not present, are they? When we look at the participants, okay. I don't see Christopher being connected.
Oh no. Okay, well, it seems
so maybe we can open the floor for the questions and see what is happening. Yes. I don't see them amongst the presenters, so we need to wait.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay, so, thank you very much.
So, great, sorry about that. I'm sure Albert will be very happy for us to distribute the slides, but we will confirm that. So I have several questions already raised in the chat for both Roberto and Ama. So I will go to those. Oh, and they have disappeared because my connection went off. So
no, go back
Harry,
to the.
if you
go
can,
back to the chat.
I know, but my chat has cleared out because of because my connection went off. So
okay,
there's that. Yes, please.
I've got my questions. I wrote down my questions. I'm
Good.
just going
There's
to
a question by Harry and by Lela to Roberto, and by Harry and by Lela to Ama. So, Ama, if you've identified the questions by Harry,
yes,
and they're followed by a sign of me going like this.
Yeah.
By Ama and another one from Lela.
I've got Roberto's question by Harry. It says, he has
I have it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ama. I have it. Is what? No, sorry. Is whether it is should be lowest cost or rather least cost strategy or value added cost strategy. And well, Harry, I don't know if you are still there. I'm afraid not. But anyway, I'm more familiar with the EU legal parlance, lowest cost or most advantageous cost. But I think the answer is yes. Indeed, we are seeing a reorientation away from lowest cost. Lowest cost is very dumb, if you want, to other more encompassing criteria like TCO, total cost of ownership, but also other new technologies, let's say like life cycle costing. With Raquel and other, we had a recent book on life cycle costing. Is still a bit in infancy, but is probably one of the ways in the future, especially for many environmental aspects, is, I think, a bit difficult and possibly unethical to put a price on human rights, social issues, and things like that. I will just add to the chat a link to the book. Thank you for your question, Harry.
There's also a question from Lela for you, Roberto, that should be followed by a sign of me doing this.
Okay, let me see. I'm looking. Lela, she was saying that we have yes. And I've on our project, we will be having a website soon. I will be happy to share the web address. But we are just finishing. We have signed the grant agreement. We are now signing the consortium agreement. It's kind of bureaucracy, but we will start in next March 1st, 2021, hoping the situation is a bit different from how it is now. Thank you.
Yes, you have two questions as well, one from Harry and one from Lela. If you can address these.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Olga. I'll go for Harry's question first. Harry asks, what are the specific indicators addressing human well-being concerning procurement practice? So basically, in Wales, each of the theme is divided into outcomes. So the theme is a prosperous Wales. And if you look at a prosperous Wales, for example, in terms of outcomes, what we want to look at in Wales, or what we want to achieve in Wales, is getting more people in employment. And as a measure of an indicator of whether we have achieved that human well-being, over the contract, the Welsh public sector will be looking at how many people have been employed or have been helped into employment or have been trained for employment, as an example of a human well-being practice that's being implemented through sustainable public procurement. So it's following through the process, looking at what is the theme that we want to pursue in terms of the goal, what is the outcome, and how can procurement be addressed or structured to achieve that outcome. In terms of the measures that will be put in place, it will differ from procurement to procurement, but this is where they need the knowledge to train procurement officials on, to draft the appropriate contract documentation, or even the tender documents to include these measures. I hope I've answered that one. Leila had a question: has COVID-19 been looked at as an opportunity to implement further sustainability concerns, as proximity of supply chain and providers has become facilitated by the closing of the borders? Same for Brexit. Yes, Leila, very excellent question. In reality, one of the things that conversations that the public sector was looking at, and a lot of the Welsh public sector were going with binational policy in some form of guise. So COVID as well as Brexit have made them to rethink how to actually structure the supply chain and use the supply chain based in Wales or around Wales. What that conversation has opened up is the reality of the fact that we don't really have suppliers for certain sectors or for certain materials. So for construction, for example, we do have a number of social suppliers, but for innovative requirements or things that are a bit more technical, we've identified that we need to upskill our supply market in order to be able to meet those requirements. Something that has come out of this is the more of the use of technology to create requirements, and the Welsh public sector, through a number of organizations, is engaging in upskilling a range of people to be able to meet the demands of the public sector in this regard. And I think the final question was from you, Roberto. You said, would a competitor or NGO be able to challenge contract documents, not taking into account future generations? Thank you for that question. It set my head going. I think theoretically, it seems a possibility, but again, it is whether, because this is a legal duty that has been established by law in the legislation, so theoretically, it's the way to go. Whether, again, an NGO or a competitor in the UK would do that is a different conversation altogether, because of our lack of appetite for instituting legal challenge. But it's something that we need to be aware of. Interestingly, a few years ago in Wales, we did a research here in Bangor University on the fact that we were not having procurement cases, even where there was flagrant abuse of the procurement rules. And we were trying to understand, is it that our public sector bodies are really getting their act right in organizing procurement, or what is the rationale? And we just found out that it wasn't so much of lack of breaches of the procurement process, but it was the cost that was more of an hindrance. So one of the things we've been advocating is for a non-litigation route to resolving disputes and presenting procurement challenges, as that could actually be a forum. But what is interesting about the Wellbeing Act is that they have a Future Generations Commissioner, and she is at the at the edge of championing this. So she would presumably be addressing public sector bodies that fail to do this in her capacity. And whether there may be repercussions from the government, I don't know. But there is certainly that challenge that will come from the government itself as they're being called to account.
Thank you.
Very good. Very really relevant points. One of the I think that I would like before we finish, if you can make a reflection, both of you, because obviously both of you come from an academic background, as so do I. You know, we have it very clear in our principles and our guidance, in our international commitments, SDGs, and then policy priorities in different governments or the involved administrations, that these are the goals. But however, how do we tell the public buyer? And this is one of the elements that Alberto always points out. Without a specific performance indicators or performance obligations and compulsory and hard objectives that public buyers have to comply with in their everyday life, how do we tell public buyers that this is relevant for them, that public purchasing practices are not just a means to develop their job, but is actually part of developing the national, international commitment of the state itself or the bodies itself. So maybe Ama, I can pass you the floor first to answer, and then Roberto, and with this we can maybe wrap up.
Thank you, Olga, for that excellent reflection. I think for me, this is why I'm very interested in the measurement, because one of the things that I find out can convince people in changing their minds or their attitudes, and something that Roberto also talked about in terms of organizational and behavioral change in his presentation, is evidence. So for me, I believe that if we could have the evidence in terms of measuring the outcomes from some of these government priorities, whether in Wales now they want to follow the TOMS project, and if we could have data showing the impact from a particular contract, how it has affected a particular economy, then that is more likely to influence the public buyers to be in tune with that policy, not seeing something as being driven from Cardiff, but something that is of essence and of benefit to his or her neighbors or even himself. Because if one person is employed as a result of a public sector contract, it affects the whole community. So I think for me, it's the measurement that will be coming out from these priorities that would be the evidence that's needed to influence practice going forward.
Thank you. Well, I will agree 100% with Ama. I would just say that procurers, they do love their children too. So, like the Russians in the song. So, if they are shown that these make the difference, this will be a great asset, part of training. Another aspect I would stress, between the level of legislation and even guidance, there is the actual procurement documents. And these are documents that even in easy case are a number of pages long. So these kind of documents should be drafted in a sustainable way to be disseminated and used with minimal hassle. I was saying, okay, but a lot of procurers in small places in Wales, they say they don't know how to use. Okay, not worry. Anyway, what are you doing? you just download this document, you customize it, quantity of laptops or things like that, but all the relevant sustainability clauses related to sustainability are already there to be picked.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm just going to read out what Leila said on the chat. When she said, "Excellent, Roberto, well put. Personal involvement and understanding of the broader picture is crucial. It gives the stamina to deal with the legislative requirements and the corresponding documentation." So thank you very much, Leila, for that contribution, because it's definitely, we need the buy-in from procurers themselves, but also specifically from, the organizations themselves and the management structures of the organizations. One thing that I keep on repeating when I talk to public buyers in the UK about the responsibility towards modern slavery in supply chains is, this is not the procurement department obligation. This is the whole institution. As an institution, you cannot be doing businesses by exploiting others, especially at universities, where I work a lot with universities, saying you can't be educating some parts of society on the exploits of other parts of society. So I think with this, we'll bring this first panel to a close. I'll pass the floor to Leila to explain the logistics after the coffee break. And after the coffee break, you will have us back. You won't have to suffer my chairing skills any longer. So I will pass that.
I will be worse. Don't worry.
Job to Roberto, and maybe Leila, you can say something about the break and when we reconvene. Thank you very much to both speakers, and of course to Albert for having done this amazing job of creating a very good presentation that I managed to destroy.
No.
And unfortunately we couldn't hear the other speakers, but it was a really good way to start, I think, this amazing.
Thank you very much for the session. Thank you very much for your sharing, Olga. It's technology, right? We couldn't meet in person, so we know that things are going to happen, which is great. We still got the presentation, which I'm very grateful for the technological part, and also for the part that Albert so kindly provided us with his presentation, despite the fact that he couldn't attend. Now we're going to take a short break, coffee break. Everybody can take something to eat, a sip of coffee, and then yes, exactly, at home, COVID, right? So after that, we're going to come back with another session, which will be chaired by Professor Roberto Caranta, where we're going to be discussing further sustainable public procurement, and then we're going to close the conference. So everybody take a good 20 minutes of break. Okay, thank you very much. See you soon.